Rushanara Ali.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Britain in the European Union has been at the heart of building peace, security and prosperity. We've played a critical role in promoting the ideals of democracy, human rights, equality and freedom. And we've worked with our European partners in fighting extremism, terrorism, protecting the environment, improving labour standards for our citizens and contributing to tackling global poverty, conflict and inequality. Since the referendum, this government has failed to build coalitions and consensus, and it's failed to prioritise economic reality over fanciful ideology. It's failed to put aside party interest in favour of the national interest. And this failure is reflected in this dreadful deal secured by the Prime Minister after 2 years. It leaves us as rule takers at the mercy of the EU when we were once equal partners setting the agenda and making the rules. It leaves us fundamentally worse off, costing billions of pounds that could have been spent in tackling the appalling social problems caused by austerity implemented by the government, such as crime, child poverty, inadequate social care, rising homelessness and the housing crisis, cuts in education and early years funding, and much else. It leaves businesses facing years of uncertainty and without clarity on what the future trading relationship will be with the European Union. It gives little clarity, Mr. Speaker, about what protections there will be for workers' rights and the environment after the implementation period. And it leaves us in a much weaker position to negotiate trade deals with non-EU countries whenever it is that we might be free to do so. And we've heard from many knowledgeable members about the length of time, and it's not going to be in 2 years, it's more likely to be 5, 6, 7 years. The EU has also been successful in negotiating over 50 trade agreements with third countries. Because as part of an EU bloc, Britain is stronger, negotiating with big emerging economic powers. It leaves us worse off, and the golden promises of the Leave campaign that were made have so far failed to materialise, because they were totally unrealistic. They were incredibly misleading and untruthful and unfair on the British people because they were so untrue and misleading. Since 2016, due to the uncertainty, the result of the referendum has already cost the UK more than 2% of GDP. Households are £900 worse off per year, and investment has gone down dramatically. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has said the impact of leaving the EU does not show we will be poorer. But that is exactly what the government's own analysis of leaving the EU shows. Under the government's deal, the economy will be 3.9% smaller. This is the equivalent of over £100 billion a year. The average person will be over £1,000 worse off, and real wages 2.7% lower. Trade barriers would be 10% of the value of the services trade. The government is asking also for us to spend £39 billion to make people poorer. How can I vote for a deal like this when it makes us even worse off? When thousands of people in my constituency rely on the jobs in the financial services, in the tech industry and other companies that trade with the European Union, and desperately need access to the single market and the customs union. Even before we leave the EU, in my constituency, half the children live in poverty thanks to the appalling policies of this heartless government. When schools face millions of pounds of cuts, when homelessness has doubled, when crime is soaring, including violent crime and knife crime, because 200 police officers have been laid off, and 21,000 nationally because of this government's programme of austerity. So I can't understand how this government can claim that this is the best they can do when Britain stands to lose so much. Instead, it will mean less money as a result of these provisions and the cost of Brexit for investment in our public services because of the tens of billions of pounds we will have to spend under the Prime Minister's deal or a no deal, the only two choices she is threatening us with. The government's future trading relationship, the political declaration that many colleagues have already spoken of, no longer mentions the promise of frictionless trade, only the possibility of cooperation. And a future customs arrangement could consist of technology solutions that don't even yet exist and are likely to cost tens of billions of pounds. Financial services, which contributes 6.5% of total economic output, more than £27 billion of tax annually, and employs over 2 million people around our country, just gets 3 paragraphs. Mr. Speaker, I refer to the financial services because my constituency sits between the City of London and Canary Wharf that are powering our economy. And too often this government fails to prioritise, fails to think about the impact of us leaving the single market and customs union in the long term on those sectors which provide so much tax revenue to our country and so many jobs around the country. And as many honourable members have already mentioned, 80% of the economy is in the services sector. And yet there's a lack of clarity in the future trading relationship about what kind of access we will have to the single market. And the relationship for UK firms in the sector will be based on equivalence, which is much worse and more limited than what we have now. It means the loss of passporting rights and 16 million people facing uncertainty about their insurance policies. And there also remains no clarity about how around £28 trillion worth of derivatives, the infrastructure that allows banks and their clients to manage risk, cash flow and capital positions, could be affected. Mr. Speaker, when the Prime Minister hastily decided and irresponsibly to start the clock by triggering Article 50, which some of us voted against, she had no strategy, she didn't have a plan, and put our country in a terrible position, at the mercy of EU negotiators who had the upper hand. Back in 2017, the UK's former ambassador to the EU, Sir Ivan Rogers, told the Treasury Select Committee that if you wanted to avoid being, and I quote, screwed in the negotiations, then invoke Article 50, but only under circumstances when you know exactly how it's going to operate. That is not what happened. This advice was not heeded by the Prime Minister, and as a result, the country is paying the price of her mistake. The Prime Minister has failed to listen to concerns across the House that have been relayed to her, including yesterday at a meeting she held rather belatedly, nearly 2 years on from triggering Article 50 with members across different parties. And she missed the opportunity to bring the House together from the beginning, as others have pointed out. And she has been beholden to managing divisions in her party, which has been ripping itself apart and making a mockery of our country to the rest of the world. Because let us not forget, the rest of the world that has historically seen us as an important ally is looking at us in dismay. So when people talk about global Britain on the other side, they should remember how this behaviour on the side of the party opposite, and the way that they tear themselves apart in expressing their division and tear the country apart, how that looks across the world when we try and present that view of an inclusive global vision, a global Britain, because we show that we are far from expressing that inclusivity and maturity that is required in the face of such a huge challenge that we have to address. And she is holding a metaphorical gun, Mr. Speaker, to our heads by giving us this false choice between her deal and no deal. It is utterly irresponsible. And she needs to stop doing that, and her ministers need to stop doing that. We will not accept this false choice. And the no-deal scenario is utterly catastrophic. The Bank of England's worst-case scenario points out that the no-deal scenario could shrink our economy by 8% and unemployment could increase dramatically with inflation spiralling out of control. My constituency will be among the worst off, as will be many other constituencies, in terms of job losses under a no-deal situation. And according to the UK Trade Policy Observatory and the University of Sussex, thousands of residents in Bethnal Green and Bow will lose their jobs. There is no majority for crashing out of the EU with no deal. And yesterday's amendment to the finance bill demonstrates that. I believe that there is a majority, Mr. Speaker, in seeking to secure a permanent customs union and a single market access, and the government should be seeking to do that. And as the government is running down the clock, Article 50 must be revoked. But of course, the best deal that we have on offer is membership of the EU. The government promised the exact same benefits, and they now offer something that is going to be damaging to our economy. In conclusion, Mr. Speaker, I cannot support this deal because I believe it will make our country worse off and my constituents worse off. The government's own analysis points to that. I believe that we should allow the public to have a final say, and with the option between the government's deal and with the option of remaining in the European Union. I, along with many of my constituents, joined over 700,000 people to march in the streets of London for a people's vote. I believe this is the only way to settle this matter, and I hope that the government will consider that option when I believe this deal is voted down. Otherwise, the consequences are that it's going to destroy livelihoods, create job losses, damage our economy, diminish our place in the world, and I believe that we cannot, nobody wants to see that happen to our country. Thank you very much.